Welcome to the Hockey Writers Prospect Corner, a show with our top prospects writing crew, bringing you the latest news, analysis, scouting reports, mocks, rankings, and much more. From the World Juniors to the NHL Draft floor, from the farm to the NHL, our team covers everything that happens in the world of prospects. So sit back, grab a notebook, and get ready for Prospect Corner.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Prospect Corner presented by the Hockey Writers. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the latest edition of the NHL Central Scouting Bureau's 2023 draft rankings. And we're also going to take a quick look, a little bit more of a preview for the upcoming U18 World Junior Championship, which, as we record this, is kicking off in, I think, a day and a half, 2 days from now, something like that. So today I'm joined by my co-hosts and fellow prospect analysts, Matthew Zator and Peter Baracchini. Matt, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Playoffs are started. One day in the books, and then we got the Central Scouting game, the final rankings coming out, and we get to discuss that. So that means the draft is pretty close. We're getting there. It's about 2.5-ish months away. So. Wow. Yeah, let's go. I mean, it's just ramping up.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a busy couple days. It's kind of like the NHL realized that with half the teams, having the playoffs to look forward to on the Monday, Tuesday this week, they're like, well, we'll give the fans of the teams that aren't in the playoffs something too with the Central Scouting rankings. Peter, how are you doing? As we record, we're about T-minus 1 hour from the Maple Leafs 2.0 series against the Lightning. So how are you feeling?
Nervous as all hell right now, I will tell you that. But it's a good thing that Central Scouting dropped their rankings to try and take my mind off it, because I got that cautious optimism in my head, but because of that doubt, this kind of takes my mind off things. So glad we're talking about this for now.
Yeah, sure. Happy to help you help you stop the sweat, stop the nerves for the next hour until you just go full tilt for the next 2.5 after that. But,
appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. So as I said, we're going to start off taking a look at NHL Central Scouting's their final rankings for the 2023 NHL Draft. For those of you who don't know, the NHL employs a team of scouts, North American and European scouts, these teams that they have a very specific way of ranking prospects based on a scale that they use, and they compile these big lists multiple times throughout the year. Just kind of a centralized ranking system, and typically they're actually quite accurate. If you look at just like last year's, the top 15, 20 players on the North American list went in almost that identical order in the first round. It's quite accurate, especially closer to the top, and a bit predictive of how NHL scouts are feeling about these players. So it's always interesting to look at, and that's why we're taking a look at it today. So they split it up between goalies and skaters, and then also between North American and European international, they call it, because not every country that is represented is in Europe. International. So we're going to start with the North American list, which means that those players are playing in North America, not that they're born there necessarily, which is why you'll see someone like Samuel Honzek in the North American list, even though he's Slovakian. So, like I said, we're going to start off with North America. And Matt, I'm going to come to you first here. We're just going to be generic. This is a lot of fun. I just love looking at these lists. So we're just going to talk about stuff that interests us here. Who's someone on the North American list that you think is still a bit underrated coming into the end of the year here?
Underrated. I mean, there's some of them didn't move at all. Like Honzek stayed at 9, and like Crystal went up 1. So I mean, it's not really that big of a thing. I mean, yeah, I was going to say a few guys that they've jumped a lot. A few of the guys that I thought were underrated in the last list have jumped up to where I think that they are actually supposed to be now. One guy I still think is Charlie Stramel, though. He dropped to 30th and he was 21st, and I thought he was underrated at 21. So he's still underrated in my mind now, even more so now that he's dropped into the 30s. So, I mean, Stramel, I think, like a lot of people I've heard a lot that his ceiling maybe just a third line center, which, I mean, I guess as a top first round pick, you're saying, well, third line center shouldn't be a first round pick. So, I mean, maybe that's why it is. So he's probably going to be dropping into the second round or mid-second, but I still think he's a really underrated forward. And now that he's dropped to 30, even more so.
Yeah, he's someone that when we saw him in the first round a few months ago was like, I don't know about that. It seems like maybe a little high, but now that he's falling, all of a sudden it kind of feels like, why isn't anyone talking about Charlie Stramel? That might be how we react the next 2 months. We'll see where he goes. That's a great one there. Peter, who's someone on this list, on the North American list, that you think is still a bit underrated?
Yeah, same for the same reasons with this player that Matt alluded to for Charlie Stramel, and that's Luca Pinelli from the Ottawa 67s. I mean, he was 49th at the midterm ranking, and now he dropped to 54th. And obviously, the size factor is going to come in. He's 5'9", 165. Obviously, it's going to play a factor, but his overall skill set, his work ethic, and his determination just really shows on the ice. I mean, 63 points in 67 games this season, a big uptick in production. But even so, right now in the OHL playoffs, he's 5th in scoring, 13 in 7 games for the 67s right now. And obviously, the hope is that the 67s could go on a deep playoff run, and he's playing a very critical factor for that. So, don't understand how he had dropped, considering that he's still been very consistent. Again, size factor is going to play a part. That's just one thing that I saw, and I'm still really high on him because he still has that motor, that work ethic and drive that makes him successful. And he doesn't let his size dictate the fact that he can, be a factor in board battles or anything like that. He goes in, he plays with a great amount of energy. So I'm really kind of shocked to see him drop. And the other one is still Denver Barkey. Rose up a bit from 84 to 79th. Still think, again, same thing. He's 5'8", 155 pounds. It's going to throw a lot of teams off, or a lot of scouts off as well. But the skill that he has in the hands, he's just a very sleek playmaker. The potential that he has is very strong. And obviously, they may have a little bit more upside compared to a player like Charlie Stramel. But obviously, the list, it is what it is. I have my different opinion, which is why I have my own rankings. Logan, yours, Matt, yours. But yeah, I just think that those two are just very underrated in terms of how they're being projected just because of their size, but the skill is very evident.
Yeah, absolutely. Where did you say? Oh, Barkey's at 79. Okay. Yeah, I feel
he
like
rose a bit, but I still think maybe mid to late second would still be a great spot for him.
Yeah, 59 says they think he's probably a third rounder, maybe later. I feel like every inch that if he grew just an inch, he would go up a round. And if he grows another inch, he'd go up another round. Like, he's such a good player. And it feels like that's really the only slight you can have against him at this point. Another player I just want to mention briefly that's in a kind of similar boat is Jaden Perron. He was ranked 28th in the midterm rankings, which we were like, okay, maybe a little low, but we get it. He's 5'9". Maybe he's being propped up a little by Max Celebrini with the Chicago Steel. But then he dropped to 43rd, which just kind of blew my mind a little bit. That tells me second, probably third round. They think that's where they would take him, at least if they were picking everything in order. That one caught my attention. But then the last one is another person that moved down that I'm genuinely surprised moved down at all. I thought, if anything, he'd start rising, and that's Aidar Suniev, who I think I spoke about recently on a recent episode. Playing behind Bradley Nadeau with the Penticton Vs in the BCHL. Tied for the league lead in goals with Nadeau. Just an absurd offensive year, big goal scoring Russian winger playing in Canada. And he was 35th in the last ranking and fell to 40th, which genuinely surprised me. I thought that him finishing out the season on the same goal scoring pace would lead to him rising a bit. But who knows? He might be a fun player to watch going in the third, fourth round, surprisingly, just because junior A hockey in Canada does not get a ton of respect. But who knows? That'll be a player to watch. But we're gonna take a look here now at some the other side of that spectrum, some players that we think are a little overrated at this point. Peter, I'll come to you first on this one. Who's someone on the North American list you think's rated a little high for your liking?
This was kind of hard because I really think that the North American side is kind of balanced out in terms of where the players are. But if I may have to pick one, Maybe Nico Mijatovic from the Seattle Thunderbirds. He was 47th previously and then went up to 26. I really like the skill set that he brings. Big power forward. He's very rangy. He does a lot of his damage at 5-on-5 and in front of the net, getting those rebounds, being a very, very strong net front presence and a solid overall offensive game. But it just seems like there's still a lot to work on. And for him to kind of be in that top 30 kind of range, it just seems a bit of a stretch for my liking. Obviously, I think maybe, 35 to 45 would have been a little bit more ideal considering that he has some things to work on, but that's just what I see in his game. But I still like him as an overall player.
Yeah, for sure. That one was a bit of a surprise to me too. He jumped from 47th to 26th on their rankings, which is a serious jump at this time in the year. And we see a few of them, and I know there's a player that, Peter, you're going to want to talk about a little later that I didn't do the math, but I'm guessing the biggest leap in the entire rankings. Yeah, I don't know. That was a surprise for me as well. I think I would agree. Overrated. You look at some of the players that they pushed him past, and I think that's a little tough to justify, but we'll have to wait and see, I suppose. Matt, who's someone on the North American list that you think might be a little overrated at this point, or maybe ranked a little higher than you would do?
I mean, I the one that kind of stood out to me, I mean, he's had a great season, but I think jumping from where he was to where he is now, Nick Lardis, from 96 to 27, that's a pretty massive jump. I mean, he has over 35-ish goals between a couple teams where he got traded during this from Hamilton. Is it Hamilton to Peterborough or Peterborough to Hamilton? I'm trying to which one. So I mean, it's, jumping that much, you're basically jumping from 96 is like a third round pick, and then you're going to 27, you're probably now a second round pick. So that's jumping around is pretty massive. But so I don't know about that, him jumping that high. So that's the only one that really stood out. The rest of them are kind of, I think maybe they moved a bit, and I mean, I don't think there's a lot of crazy overrated guys that on this list, at least from what I'm looking right now.
Yeah, nothing feels like way too often having a bunch of guys way too high or something. One that stands out to me as higher than I would be comfortable with is Danny Nelson from the U18 NTDP team. Spent most of the year on that second line with Oliver Moore. Had a good season in general, and he's a big forward. I think he's 6'3", 6'2", 6'3", and I like him a lot. But you look at the players that they had to push him past to get him to 22nd here. He's past Gavin Brindley, Grayson Sachin, Cohen Ziemer, Tanner Molendijk, Charlie Stramo, Luca Cagnoni. Like, there's plenty of guys on there that I would have over him. So that's just one that I'd be a little off on compared to their rankings. Also, someone that I forgot to mention in the underrated a little bit, like maybe ranked a little too low. Some guys that we noted last time were a little too low as well. Like Riley Height moved up a little bit from 26 to 21, but that puts you in very end of the first round range. And it seems like we're all relatively in agreement that he's better than that. That might, again, just be a height thing, keeping him out of the, oh no, that was the worst pun of my life. A height thing for Riley Height, keeping him out of the top 20 or so. I'll take that. I'll pretend I did that on purpose. Move on. Okay, so this one is just to give you guys the floor to talk about something you're excited about, someone you're excited about. So Matt, I'll come to you first. Who's a riser in this edition that you're just very excited about?
You guys know who it is. It's Matthew Wood. Jumping from 8 to 4 on this list. He is now the 4th best forward in the North American side, behind Will Smith, Anna Pentilli, and Connor Bedard. So very happy that they listened and taken my advice, think that this guy is worth a lot more than what they had him. I mean 4 spots. It's not a crazy jump, but he is now in the top 5 of the best like forwards in this draft. So now ahead of Ryan Leonard, who was obviously ahead of him before, and a guy like Zach Benson, who's a big prospect that we've talked about a lot, and him being in your, Logan, he was in your top 5, right? Or was he? Yeah. So I mean, he was 5th. So I mean, it's a pretty massive thing to jump above these guys and be behind the likes of Fantilli, or just Fantilli, Bedard, and Smith. So unfortunately, he's now going to be drafted way ahead of where the Canucks are going to be now, I believe. And now Central Scouting is saying that, and it'll probably happen. He'll probably be drafted in the top 10. Like I've said many times already, that I think he's going to be a top 10. I had a top 15 pick, but I think he's closer to a top 10 pick. So Matthew Wood jumping to 4. I was like ecstatic to see that when I was looking at the list. So Matthew Wood for sure. Also like that they jumped William Whitelaw up as well, from 55 to 42, which is a pretty good jump. Now he's into that realm of a probably mid to late second round. So I mean that, other guys were maybe in the 3rd round before. So I'm liking that Whitelaw got some love on this list as well. So those are my 2 guys, and I've beaten the drum on those 2 for a while. And one guy, I don't know if we're going to talk about disappointing, but I didn't like that Mazin Leslie dropped as well. So, but those 2 guys, great to see them jump up a bit.
Yeah, for sure. It's fun that at this point in the year, we know each other's picks so much that when I saw that Wood was jumping up so significantly, I was like, can't wait to see what Matt thinks. I was just itching to hear your take on it. I just knew you'd be so excited. That's also what this question was designed around, basically. But also in part, it was designed around who I can only assume Peter's going to talk about. I don't know. But Peter, who's a riser in this ranking that you're particularly excited about?
Yeah, it's one jump up from 16 to 15, and that's Andrew Crystal. I'm just joking. I am glad he got a little bit of a bump. I would have expected a bit more, but the pick I am going with is the one that Matt already talked about, and that's Nick Lardis. Obviously, that it is a massive jump, and you do expect to see maybe 1 or 2 players sort of fly under the radar halfway through and then start to have that jump down the stretch. And ever since he got traded from Peterborough to Hamilton, he's just been a completely different player, finding the back of the net with his shot. And, even in a post back in February where they were talking about him and his red hot start to being a Hamilton Bulldog, and they're putting him in situations that he could thrive in and excel. And he's rising to the occasion in those game-breaking moments or game-changing moments that, maybe scouts want to see a little bit more of. He already has, the creativity in the shot. And I think they want to see a little bit more of the impact side of his game. And he's showing that right now. So that is the reason why, like halfway through, even in January, February, like I took note of Lardis's game and I'm like, okay, you know what? This is a player that I want to see a little bit more of. And every single outing that I saw of him just came away easily more impressed with him. And now the fact that, there's going to be a chance for him at the U18 championship for him to excel there. It's going to be very impressive to see what he can do. And again, 10 points in 6 games, impressive for the stint that he was in for the Hamilton Bulldogs. And now he has a chance to be a leader for Team Canada and improve that draft stock even more. So big on Nick Lardis right now. And I'm going to give a little bit of an honorable mention to Carey Terrence from the Erie Otters as well. Obviously the Otters did not have the greatest season, but 30 goals in 47 points in 67 games is really impressive, if you ask me, considering the Otters kind of were bleeding offense, and he was a factor with his speed and his drive and his ability to utilize that aspect of his game quite a lot. And I was even impressed with his game at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup to start the season as well. So he was on my radar, and he continued to kind of be that, dynamic, speedy centerman that, plays with that high offensive upside. So really happy to see him jump as well.
Yeah, absolutely. For myself, some players that I'm excited about that were rising a bit. I mentioned both of them earlier. They're back-to-back here, ranked 23rd and 24th. Previously ranked 40th and 42nd. That's Gavin Brindley and Grayson Sachin, two players I've just been a real big fan of this year. Sachin hasn't played in like a month and a half. He got injured. So instead of playing third line minutes for the Seattle Thunderbirds, where he was just killing it still, behind like Brad Lambert and Colton Dock, I think. He's not been in games for a little while, which is unfortunate because I think a good playoff run for him would have gone a long way. But selfishly, I love that he's not playing because the Red Wings have picks 41, 42, and 43 in the second round. And who knows, maybe he's there. But I love both those players, now ranked early 20s on the North American side, which, you know, leans toward probably a first rounder, at least maybe like a coin flip first rounder at that point. I mean, Brindley, I just think he's one of the most competitive and tenacious players in the draft. I know he lacks the size, but you look at the scoring, you look at the way he plays well in multiple different roles. He has the speed and the tenacity to be a bottom six type forward, but he also has the skill and the playmaking to be a legit top six contributor, at least a complementary piece that just fights hard, retrieves pucks, and makes plays to teammates that can score better, like he did with Adam Fantilli for the last half of the season. So I still think it's a little wild to see him at 23 in just the North American side, because I think that's about where I would pick him overall, 23rd. But I'm glad that he's getting a little more respect. I hope for once we see one of these, like, you know, scouting world darlings that is under 5'10" actually go in the first round. We'll see if this is the year. We've got a few chances with like Andrew Crystal, who's almost certainly going to be a first rounder because the talent's insane. Zach Benson, almost certainly a top 10 pick. But guys like Perron and Brindley are kind of on the bubble there, so we'll see where they end up. All right, so I've got one question about the goaltending rankings, and then we'll move on to the international ranking. So I'm just looking at the North American goaltending rankings because the vast majority of the goalies that I expect to be drafted are on that side, and all the top guys are there. So I'm just curious your guys' thoughts on this ranking. Basically, I'll give you the names that stick out to me. At number 1, you've got Carson Bjarnason. Number 2, it's Michael Hrabal. 3, Trey Augustine. 4 is Scott Ratzlaff. 6, I'm jumping a little, is Adam Gajan. You might remember him from the World Juniors. And then at 9 is Thomas Suchanek, who also at the World Juniors was, I believe, the goalie of the tournament, or at least really pushed Canada in the gold medal game. So Peter, I'll come to you first here. What are your thoughts on this ranking? Does it differ much from yours? What trends do you think are going on here, like age and size and stuff like that? What are your thoughts?
I mean, obviously, when you look at, you know, Bjarnason 6'3", Hrabal 6'6", Augustine 6'1", obviously size is going to be a big factor. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But I think in just terms of overall upside, I think Trey Augustine remains my top goaltender. You know, considering what he, obviously the development team program is always going to be a star-studded affair, but the fact that he had a very solid record and very solid production in terms of his save percentage, 922 with the development team and 928 for Team USA in the USHL. Still impressive numbers that he was putting up. And, you know, you'll point to the World Juniors, how he didn't have the best numbers or whatever, but there were times where Team USA wasn't looking that great and he was their best player nonstop, especially in that bronze medal game, trying to, you know, factor in and just be the backstop and net for them. So I think he still remains my top goaltender, but I'm kind of a little bit disappointed that Thomas Milic not only isn't, like, you know, a top goaltender right now, but he dropped from 25 to 28th. And considering kind of the same situation, like, you know, Trey Augustine, backstop Team Canada, was there, probably let him a few soft goals, but considering how he's, you know, on a very solid Seattle Thunderbirds team, and he's still putting up very solid numbers in 33 games. He has a 928 save percentage and 4 shutouts. That, to me, and in regards to his mobility and movement in the crease, tracking the puck and everything like that, I still think it's still, you know, top 10 worthy for him being up there with some of the other top names like Sahanic, Ayan, Fowler, even his teammate Scott Ratzlaff. I think Scott Ratzlaff is close to being my second goaltender behind Augustine, but how Milic is still so low, considering what he did at the World Juniors to try and put his name on the map, is, kind of something that's a little bit, that stood out for me.
Yeah, Milic feels like someone that we're gonna always hype up and hope that he gets drafted and gets that shot, but it just doesn't seem to be coming for him. I feel pretty confident he's gonna get signed in some capacity once he's out of the CHL, either by an NHL team to, go through their development system, or by an AHL team to go through their development system. He's too good for that not to be a possibility for him, for that not to be an option and an opportunity given to him. Yeah, I'm a little surprised too that he's just kind of disappearing off the bottom end of the ranking somehow. Yeah, I do want to say, like, Augustine also was 17 at the time of the tournament, the last World Juniors. He was playing as at times the best goalie for the team, as a 17-year-old, which is best player for the team at just 17, which is absurd. And Milic was right up towards the end of the eligibility. So the age difference does factor, but also size, because, apparently 6'1" isn't tall when you're in the NHL and you're a goalie. But Matt, what are your thoughts on the goalie situation here with the rankings?
Well, I agree with their top goaltenders. I Bjarnason, I do agree though. I mean, Trey Augustine, I think, should be a bit higher. Parable definitely has had a great season, or had a great season in the USHL. It's these three are probably the top three goaltenders. I mean, that's probably where they're gonna go. But I didn't like that Guyan dropped to 6. I thought 4 was a good spot for him. But Ratzlaff had a great season with Seattle as well, so he probably deserved a bit of a bump. But Guyan, I mean, dropping 2 spots, not that big of a deal. But I do think that I'm kind of leaning the same way, that Augustine probably is more the top goaltender than, Bjarnason will probably get drafted first. But we'll have to see. I think these three are going to be solid starters of the NHL at some point. It's just where they go in the draft. If one gets in the first round, like you had Augustine, Peter, at 30, was it 32? So 32, yeah. So one of these guys could be drafted in that range, right at the end of the first round. And I'm leaning towards Augustine being that guy, even though they have Bjarnason at 1 and Hrabal at 2. But all these guys didn't change from the mid to the final. So it was beyond that changed quite a bit. And there are quite a few goaltenders that jumped up. Like one guy that's really big for me is Zachary Bowen from 29 to 15, and that's a pretty big jump for a goaltender from basically. When would he be drafted at 29?
Undrafted,
maybe undrafted, right?
Yeah.
He's now into a spot where it could be later round pick or something like that. It's hard to judge where goaltenders go in the draft because a lot of teams don't like taking goaltenders unless they're really high end in the second round or first round. They're usually in third, fourth, and beyond. I do agree though with Milic. I don't understand why they're kind of souring on him now. All of a sudden, I thought he was low at 25 in the mid, and now he's dropped even further. And I don't know. He may not get drafted now again, and that's the third time he's gone through the draft.
Yeah.
So, it's unfortunate. I think a team's going to be signing him, and they're going to get a pretty solid. I don't know if starter, but definitely a backup or a 1B or something like that. A lot of people are sleeping on this guy, but who knows?
Sure. Yeah. I think Bjarnason especially is a tough one to kind of get a hold of, just because the Brandon Wheat Kings were very bad this year. And him and Nate Danielson did just about everything they could to make them not bad, but it was not nearly enough. And so I think he gets if you just look at statistics, like his year wasn't all that impressive. Lots of losses on there. But, goalies can only handle so much of the game. I do see a lot of potential in Bjarnason. I think he's still narrowly my top rated goalie, just like in my mind, not in my rankings. That's not the same thing. I don't know. I don't know what my rankings were, but Augustine, a close second for me. Guyan, I think I'd have third. I was just thoroughly impressed with him at the World Juniors. He only got into a handful of USHL games. He played in the North American Hockey League below that for most of the season. But in the USHL, he was excellent. And I believe he's playing in college hockey next year. So that's someone to watch. Actually, I think I know which team. Where was that? University of Minnesota Duluth. He's playing there in the NCAA. So I hope he can get into some games next year and surprise a little bit more. Anyway, we're going to move on here to the international list. So all your Euro players, let me get mine open here. We've got a massive groundbreaking, nothing changed at the top. The first time I looked at it, I saw Leo Carlson and I was like, what? They changed it from Medvedev's? And then I checked the midterms and oh yeah, we got upset about that last time. Oh no. I can move on from that. So we're going to go through the same exercise here. Actually, we're going to start with a player or two you think are a little you think are still a little underrated. We're going to start off with someone that you would still have a little higher. Peter, I'll come to you first.
I am. You know what? I'm gonna go on the Alex Ciernik train. I mean, he stayed the same at 21, but I feel like considering that he's playing at the pro level already, playing at a higher level at the Allsvenskan level in Sweden, I think he has a lot of upside in terms of his playmaking ability. He's got great speed. He kind of has that not underwhelming, but can't remember that. I lost track of my thought there in terms of Ciernik, but I kind of see similarities between him and Philip Mejar, how they play with that high level of energy, with the speed and the pace that they play, and we're seeing how well Mejar is translating to the North American style game, playing in the OHL right now. Ciernik is probably benefiting even more right now, playing among older competition and senior competition. But yeah, he looked good at the junior level. Obviously, when you get up to that the second level and move on up, ice time is going to be hard to come by, but he's still making the most of his time. 6 points in 15 games. Really think that maybe he could have been bumped up just a little bit, and maybe scouts are still sleeping on him, but I think he's got a really good, solid skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. Ciernik's someone that I agree should be a little higher. And I did a mock draft article recently, and I had him going at the very end of this first round. I don't know that he's there right now, but I'm just kind of hoping and projecting a good tournament at the U18s, and I think that could do a lot for him. Playing against your own age group for once again, instead of playing in Allsvenskan, you're going to look a lot quicker. You're going to look a lot more impressive, and I like to think that'll do wonders for his draft stock a bit, but that'll be kicking off real soon. So I guess we'll get to watch and find out. But Matt, who's someone on the Euro list here, the international list, that you think is still a little underrated?
Well, I'm going to say this now, he's underrated because of where he's dropped to, and that's Axel Sandin-Pellikka. He's now dropped to 7th, and he was 3rd on the midterm list.
Mm-hmm.
Why he dropped to 7 I have no idea. I still believe he's still the second. I believe he's still the second ranked defenseman. He is, yeah. So I mean, it's not like he's dropped from that status, but now he's dropped in the overall rankings. That's quite a few spots. So I mean, I'm a little happy that he may drop to a spot where, although never mind, the Canucks don't have that pick anymore. Never mind. I will. Yeah, they would have had that pick. They didn't make that trade. But Sandin-Pellikka dropping to 7. He's become underrated because he's dropped quite a bit, I think, from 3 to 7. That's the one that really stood out when I was looking. Another guy I'll kind of mention is Noah Dower Nielsen. He's a bit underrated now because he's dropped to 17. I think I don't think he should have dropped. I think he just stayed where he was. So, I mean, those are the two guys that I kind of see, as being still underrated in my opinion. Cernak would have been one of my picks as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. For myself, it might be counterintuitive, but I'm picking two players that rose as players that are still underrated. That's Oscar Fisker-Molgaard and Dmitry Simashev. They're ranked 18th and 19th. Fisker-Molgaard went from 50th to 18th, which is like you're going like 5th round or later to like 2nd round, probably roughly. And Simashev moved up a couple spots. Those guys are in my 1st round, no doubt at this point. Fisker-Molgaard as just a centerman playing a middle 6 centerman role in the SHL as a teenager. Kind of a Marco Kasper light situation where he's great defensively, really good at driving play in the right direction, winning puck battles, but doesn't really have a lot of offense at this point. He scored, I think, 7 points in the SHL this year, which is good for a 17, 18-year-old. But he hasn't shown the potential that Kasper showed at the same spot last year, where you're like, I could see a little bit more. There's not a lot of that with Fisker-Molgaard, but the defensive play gives me so much confidence that he'll be at very least a bottom 6 center. And if you are an NHL team and you think you can find some offense in there at all, like that is a great pick at the end of the 1st round in my eyes. And then Simashev, I've talked about a bunch. I do not understand how he's ranked. What is he ranked here? 19th in the international list. That's bonkers to me. I would like him in the top 20, genuinely. I would be okay with him in the top 20. So for him to just be inside the top 20 of only the internationalist kind of blows my mind a little. I think he's pretty underrated. But let's look at someone we think might be a little overrated. Matt, is there anyone on this list strikes you as ranked a little too high?
I mean, a lot of the guys didn't really, I don't know. I can't really pick anyone that's really high that I kind of say, well, maybe they shouldn't be there. I'll say
a compliment to Central Scouting.
Yeah, I mean, for the international list at least. I mean,
sure, yeah.
One guy I'll maybe pick out is Daniel Boot. Rising. I mean, we've had him kind of talking about it. Maybe he shouldn't. I think he was one of the names we had when he was 11th. We were talking about him being a bit high, and now he's jumped to 9, so maybe a bit more. But I mean, he's still probably in that range. Yeah, I can't really pick anyone right now from looking at the list that's really high. Yeah,
totally fine. It is generally a pretty good list. I mean, all the top guys that we hear about in the 1st and 2nd round are generally in a chunk here. Just maybe the order's a little mixed up from how you would see it, but it's also always hard to get a grip on the international list versus North American list and how they'll line up on draft day. How many North Americans will go in the 1st round? How many international? So it's kind of a tough thing to wrap your head around. Peter, do you have anyone on this international list you think is rated a little too high for you?
Yeah, I'm actually at the point now where I may have Daniel Boot over Lainey Haminaho, and I still don't understand why he's still so high, especially in the top 10. I mean, he does have some good attributes, like his physical play, his ability to battle along the boards, but I feel like he lets the play come to him more than he goes to it, and that kind of like it still puts me on the fence with him, because he does have all those attributes that makes him a very gritty and tenacious winger, but at the same time, there's still something about it that I just don't see. And even so, I saw a couple comments online about Haminaho still being in the top 10 and just dropping 1 spot. But yeah, that's the only thing on my mind at this point.
Yeah, that's a good one. Haminaho, it's been all over the place this year. Every time we see these rankings, it's kind of like, really? Like, what's going on? It's like the only people that believe in him are NHL Central Scouting, which means there are probably some NHL GMs who believe in him. So yeah, that's worth something. But one person that I think is a little overrated, and I do mean it when I say a little, is Otto Stenberg. I do love that he hasn't dropped dramatically on this list because he's genuinely an excellent player. Has not had quite the draft year that I'm sure he hoped for after the Hlinka Gretzky tournament, where he was looking like maybe a top 10 pick coming out of that tournament. Top Swede probably over Leo Carlson. That switched dramatically, but and it's mostly due to the players that they've ranked below him, and that's not his fault, it's their fault. Like Sandin-Pellikka being below Stenberg strikes me as a little bit iffy. Gulyayev I'd probably have above, and then the guys I mentioned before, Oscar Fisker Molgaard would kind of be in competition with Stenberg in my rankings probably, and Simashev I'd have a lot higher than they put him here. So I wouldn't say he's a lot overrated. I'm glad that they haven't overreacted and kind of bumped him down too far, but I'm sure that's also the minds of NHL scouts. It's because, you got to have a long memory. You got to see the potential over a long period of time. Potential isn't just in their draft year, although draft years are pretty important. So last bit on this part of our show. Again, I'm just going to ask you guys to give me a player you're excited about. They don't have to be a riser this time because there wasn't as much movement, but someone on this list you're pretty excited about. Matt, who do you got?
David Reinbacher, jumping to 5 from 10. It's not a surprise. I mean, we've talked about him rising up the rankings in a lot of places. I think he'll end up being a top 10 pick. I mean, he may even jump into, one team may take him in the, I don't know about the top 5, but around there, maybe. I mean, you're looking at this guy as being, I think, could potentially jump into the NHL within the next 2 seasons. He's pretty refined, and he has got, we've said it before, size. He's got mobility. He's got I think for sure a top pairing defenseman, right hand shot. So it looks like NHL Central Scouting is in agreement and it's jumped him up because he was the top ranked defenseman in the midterm rankings he wasn't. See, Axel Sandin-Pellikka was ahead of him. He was actually the top because he was 3 and Reinbacher was 10. So they've now said, now they're saying Reinbacher's the best defenseman of this draft. And I think he probably is. So I'm excited to see him get that 5th spot on this list. I don't think Sandin-Pellikka should be, that far. Well, he's not far behind him, I guess. He's just two away. So the gap is short, has lessened. And so Reinbacher for me is most exciting. That's the one that jumped out right away when I was looking.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're saying there, there's 0% chance I would take Reinbacher 5th overall, no matter what team I was picking for. However, I would also be not surprised at all to see him go 5th overall, because a big right-handed defenseman with legit top pairing potential is very exciting and very important to teams that don't have that. So I wouldn't be surprised at all, and I wouldn't think it's the worst choice in the world. Although Benson, Smith, all these guys are leaving behind might make you regret it a little, but who knows? Peter, who's someone on this edition of the international rankings that you're just excited about? Someone you want to talk about?
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about awesome names in this draft, and I am going to go over and say Anton Wahlberg. Wishing he would kind of be an action hero, kind of like Mark, but at the same time, I really he's a really, really late riser for me, and I've just been absolutely impressed with this play. Steady overall two-way game, but he's very strong in transition. He's got great size, excellent speed, and edge work for his 6'3" frame. 194 pounds, has great control. He scans the ice very, very well and finding open spots. Putting the puck in perfect spots for his teammates, and just absolutely love what he was able to do throughout the season, and even clips like early on. I guess I took note of it, went away from him, came back, and I was still absolutely impressed with his overall game. So that's one. Obviously, he didn't rise a lot, 32 to 30. I still think that maybe he can have a really standout U18 tournament and boost his stock even more, because he's an absolute force and he dictates the pace of play and takes control of the game every single time he's on the ice. So really excited for him.
Nice. That's a great one. I'll just get mine in quick before we move on. And that is Ian Scherzer. Still way down the rankings, but he moved up pretty significantly. He was ranked 111th in the midterms and 85th here. He's a center in the Rogla system in Sweden, but he's an Austrian forward. You might remember him from the World Juniors, scoring Austria's first goal of the tournament, which took them a while. But he was honestly pretty good. That whole tournament was, other than Reinbacher, was almost certainly the best player in Austria. He's, hasn't had the greatest draft season, but easy to root for. Really hardworking young kid at that tournament. So I hope he gets drafted. 85th on the international rankings. Not necessarily going to get drafted, but I hope that World Juniors showed teams the energy he can bring, some of the character he's got there. Maybe he gets his shot. But again, gotta wait and see. That's all this is. Prospects is just waiting to see if they're good, and then they're not prospects anymore, and we don't get to talk about them. That's a different podcast at that point. Okay, we've got a couple quick fire questions here for you guys, and then we'll move to the second half of the show quick. So, as I mentioned earlier, the Central Scouting's rankings are usually actually pretty accurate to the real draft order. Obviously, you've got the different lists kind of getting merged at some point. Who's someone that you think they'll get wrong? Like someone that might move into the top. No, I won't give a spot. Just who's someone that you think will get drafted at like a pretty significantly different spot than they've got them ranked. This is, I acknowledge this is kind of a hard question to dump on you guys, but I'll go first for it. And I'm going to take Gabe Perreault, who they have ranked 10th in this one. And I actually like that spot a lot. I've been liking him a lot more lately in some of the viewings I've had of all those NTDP guys. But I genuinely think he's going to fall a bit. I think he's going to go into the 20s, and I don't think they've got him quite at that spot. I think a couple guys are going to bump him down, and you'll see all the centermen going early, like Jaeger and stuff. Jaeger, Danielson, Moore, whatever. So Perreault is someone that I think they might have kind of in the wrong order compared to draft day. Obviously, they're not perfect. That would be insane if they were actually perfect, because none of us are. But Matt, who's someone that you think is going to get drafted at a different spot than they've got them kind of situated?
Well, you mentioned him before, it's Gavin Brindley. I think they have him in 23 now. I think he's going to be drafted around the spot they had him before. And again, it's the size factor. I think a lot of teams are still afraid of that, even though they shouldn't be. But that's why Logan Stankoven dropped to the second round, mid-second. And I think a guy like Brindley's going to, unfortunately, be around that spot too. Being where they have him, maybe that's where they're saying he's going to be in the, early second round, but he could also be a late first. I think he'll probably be drafted in around I think he's going to drop is what I'm saying. I think he's going to be one of those guys you're going to be looking at, and it's like, why isn't Brindley drafted yet? And just like we had with Stankoven, I just think that's probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, that feels pretty fair. Like the Lane Hudson watch last year when it just started to get ridiculous. It might be that situation again. Peter, who's someone that you think will be drafted in a pretty different spot than they've been ranked here?
I not necessarily different spot, but I still don't understand why Riley Heidt is ranked 21st overall. I mean, considering what he was able to do at the WHL level, I'm going to go in the reverse of that, where maybe he should be drafted higher than where he is right now, as opposed to maybe being drafted lower from where he is. But I just don't think 21 is a good spot for him. He should be higher, considering how dynamic and how much of a game-changing prospect he can be, or player he can be. So, yeah, that's my pick.
Yeah, that's a fair one. And we'll mention it quickly up ahead here, but he's hopefully, maybe not hopefully, but if the playoffs don't go very well, there's always a chance that he could join Team Canada for the World Juniors, the U18s. could be a big part of the team there. Who knows what that would do for him? All right, I'm going to thank our sponsors here, and then we're going to cut to the World Junior U18 real quick before we wrap up, so Peter can get to the game, but also everyone can do their own things. All right, so today's episode is brought to you again by our sponsor, Hockeypedia. You ever been looking for details on a player that just competed at the World Junior Championship? Do you want to know who owns the New York Islanders? Do you want to know what the NHL awards are and who they're all named after? If you're interested in these or any other hockey-related questions, make sure you check out and bookmark the Hockey Writers Hockeypedia, an ever-growing collection of hockey resources that is invaluable to any fan looking for information. Check for a link in the show's description below and dive in today. All right, so as we're recording, like I said, the U18 World Junior Championship is just a couple days away, and it might have started by the time you're listening to this. Not all of the rosters have been announced, to my knowledge, at least, but we'll chat through a few teams that have announced them pretty quick here. So I'll start with Canada. They released their roster recently, and one of the first things I noticed, at least, was that Connor Bedard and Adam Fantilli were nowhere to be found. You know, maybe there's a chance they're holding out for the men's World Championships for Team Canada. Maybe not. Who knows? So my question for you guys is, with those guys out of the picture, assuming they don't end up on this team in like the last second, who do you think will lead Canada in scoring? Or maybe you could go with the lead them in offense. Doesn't have to be point totals, but like someone like Colby Barlow, Andrew Crystal, maybe Max Celebrini, you think could be an underager and lead the team. Peter, what do you think? Who's going to lead Canada on offense?
Yeah, I honestly think this is a tough one because all the star players that they have are probably going to be relied on heavily. So you are looking at Barlow, Crystal, Callum Ritchie as well, and even Celebrini, because of the fact that he dominated the USHL with the season that he had. You know, what was he on pace for? 90 points. It was absolutely amazing what he was able to do, and 46 goals this season. So, yeah, if there's any, I mean, we saw Bedard take control of the tournament for Canada last season. Who's to say that Celebrini can't do it again this time as an underager for this team? But they got a lot of great weapons up front. You know, didn't even mention Matthew Wood. We've also mentioned Nick Lardis throughout the show as well. But yeah, they for usually at this time, they kind of struggle to get top tier prospects because most of them are in the playoffs. Well, they got a really hefty and strong lineup right now with a lot of firepower up front. So yeah, this is going to be a offense by committee kind of thing because everybody's going to contribute something.
Yeah, that's fair. Matt, what are your thoughts on Team Canada's offense here with Bedard and Fantilli nowhere to be found on this roster? Who do you think might lead their offense in the absence?
I'm going to go on a limb and say Matthew Wood, and not because I love him, but no, that's why. He's just so much. I don't know. I feel he's a really mature player already. What he did in the NCAA is just is amazing. Like being the youngest player to do what he did, and being on a team that, I mean, that may be way off base and he doesn't contribute a lot, but I think he has the capacity, especially without guys like Bedard and Fantilli, who's going to be the guys that are going to be getting more minutes in those prime situations on the power play and what have you. I think Wood is going to be one of those guys, just with his shot and his ability to, his hands around the net and all that, and his size. I think he could be a really big performer in these under 18s. And like you said, Colby Barlow, obviously another guy is very mature in his game. They could be those two powers running the tournament. So lots of talent, and Crystal as well. I mean, Canada usually has a crazy amount, even if they don't have the top names. So, but I'm going to go with Matthew Wood. Just if it happens, then I'll be like, well, I told you so.
I knew it. Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Clip it.
I will say,
clip it.
Yeah, that's right. I remember Wood had a bit of an underwhelming performance at last year's U18s for Canada. So maybe that'll light a fire under him to show out. Just on a pure prediction level, I'm going with Celebrini. I think he's going to be the most dynamic player that Canada has, maybe behind Crystal actually, but he's like a year and a half younger than Andrew Crystal. Celebrini is incredible, and I think this is his first chance at, this is going to be the biggest tournament he's played for Canada, biggest stage probably, and I think he'll take that and run. Next question up here. Team USA is going to be bringing their U18 team from the NTDP, with the tons of 2023 prospects: Will Smith, Gabe Perreault, Ryan Leonard, Oliver Moore, plenty more that we've talked about over the year. Do you think they are the favorites in this tournament? I mean, they always kind of are because they've got a team that's played together all season. Do you think they're in the favorites in this tournament, considering that group of prospects, but also the fact that they have one of the top goalies in the draft class and in the age group in Trey Augustine? Matt, what do you think? Do you think USA is the favorite?
I think they are, and now even more so that Bedard and Fantilli aren't on Team Canada. Canada, I think it's going to be a Canada-US, gold medal game, which would be great. So, I mean, yeah, they've got a great team, and the chemistry that they've got, because they've played, like you said, all year. I think they are the favorite, and they've got like some of the top names in this draft, like Will Smith, like Gabe Perreault, those guys. I think they're all going to be drafted in that top 15, 20 range. Some of them even in the top 10. So they're definitely the favorites going in. If they win the gold, who knows? But I think they are the favorite to come into the tournament.
Yeah, for sure. I'd agree with you there. Peter, what are your thoughts on Team USA? Do you think they've got to be the favorites here coming in with all their chemistry, and also with Trey Augustine, who you've got ranked at the very tail end of the first round, so you clearly like him.
Yeah, and even you look at past tournaments too, the USA is always dominated because of the fact, like you said, they have those teams that build chemistry. And prime example is last year's team with Logan Cooley, Rucker McGroarty, Isaac Howard, Cutter Gauthier, all throughout the lineup. That team was absolutely solid. Unfortunately, they fell short of their ultimate goal, of the gold medal, losing to Team Sweden, who was just as deep and talented. But no matter what, from top to bottom, forward, defense, goaltending, USA is probably always the team to beat, because they have the same roster that they have throughout the whole entire season, as opposed to, let's say, Canada, Sweden, where players are playing on different teams. So, I mean, consensus is they're going to be the favorite no matter what, next season, the season after that, because they're going to have this group playing throughout the whole entire season, and they're going to be competing most of the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if I was a betting man, I would bet on USA, because also, aside from the 2023s, you've got Cole Eiserman, one of the very top prospects for 2024, who got called up from the U17 team to the U18 team and has scored, I believe it's 16 goals and 20 points in 12 games, which is absurd for an underage player. And then James Hagens, who's a 2025 draft eligible, has also been called up, played a good amount of time in the middle six on the wing for USA. And I believe both of them are going to be at the tournament with the USA, which is just like upsetting if you're a fan of any team other than the USA. So they're the favorites in my eyes. I've got one last question here. Who is an underager in this year's tournament? Guys, we've talked about Eiserman, Celebrini, maybe Hagens, Helenius for Finland, or Aaron Kiviharju for Finland. There's plenty of options. Who's an underage player in this tournament that you think will have a really good showing? Someone that you just think will have a good tournament. Last year we saw Bedard, Edward Shala just like show out and improve their draft stock. I mean, Bedard didn't really have much to do there, but Shala sure did. So who's going to do it this time around? What do you think, Peter?
The easy answer is going to be Celebrini, Helenius, Kiviharju, Eiserman, but I'm going to go with Tanner Howe. Mainly because obviously on the Regina Pats, Connor Bedard was the marquee name, but you look at who was behind him. Alexander Suzilev was second in scoring, but Tanner Howe was 1 point off from Suzilev with 85 points. And, that's really impressive, especially when you're playing on the wing of Connor Bedard. Obviously, he doesn't he wasn't a first round pick. He was, I believe, drafted in the fourth round of the WHL draft. And considering that, he doesn't quite have that pedigree because of his draft stock, he's making himself a top 10 pick in next year's draft right now. He looked great at the Hlinka Gretzky Cup and looked great all season. I'm expecting him to have another stand-up performance at this tournament because of the fact that, maybe playing second fiddle to Bedard, because all eyes were on him. But you know what? With Bedard probably gone, he's going to be leading the charge offensively. And despite his size, he's got a very, very lethal offensive skill set. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on Tanner Howe to see what he could do this time around.
Nice. That's a great pick. He's a real tough player to get a hold of because it's like the whole Connor McDavid back in the OHL situation where you're like, are these guys great because they play with him? Yeah. Or does he look better because they're really good? Like you're trying to parse out that, and next year should be very, very informative on Tanner Howe. We'll see how he does. I mean, obviously his points are probably going to go down just because playing alongside Bedard is just like he's handing out free points to anyone that can pass him.
Yes.
But I don't think he's like a paper tiger or some guy that's going to fall to like 30 points next year. I think he's legit. It's going to be interesting to see just how much he can do on his, more on his own then. Matt, what about you? Who's an underage player in this tournament that you think will have a real good showing?
Well, Tanner Howe is going to be my pick too, because I've loved him from like last season. We had when I did Western Centric, we had him on the show, and he's a great kid, and he's had a great season. I mean, yes, he played with Bedard, but he's a very skilled player. I think he's going to end up being a high pick coming up. So Howe would be my pick as well. I think he's going to have a heck of a tournament. And Celebrini, I mean, I think he's probably going to be really good too. But Tanner Howe would be my pick for it too.
Yeah, I think Celebrini is probably like the safest of all these picks. I feel like he's just almost, you can just like mark him in pen at this point that he's going to look really good. So I'm going to go with Konsta Helenius for Finland. He's 16 still for another couple weeks here, and he played 33 games in the Liga as the youngest player in the league, and he got 11 points this season. And he didn't just, those were not just given to him. He earned those. He's an excellent playmaker. And that's just remarkable. He was tied for third in scoring among all U19 players in Liga. So that's 2 ages above his, and he was still the third highest scoring forward. Every age group under that, he was the highest by a wide margin. So he's someone to keep an eye on. I think he could be a bit of a breakout start to his draft year, maybe, for Helenius. All right, we're going to move on to the way we love to wrap up our show each week, which is our prospects of the week. I'll kick us off, and then I'll pass it off to you guys. I'm going with Brad Lambert, the Seattle Thunderbirds draft pick of the Winnipeg Jets. Just has had the most up and down couple years. Looked like shoe-in for a top 5 pick in the 22 draft, and fell all the way to 30th, I believe. And had a good start in the AHL for the Manitoba Moose. Not amazing, but good for an 18-year-old. But after the World Juniors around that time, he was sent down to the Seattle Thunderbirds in the WHL and has looked excellent. I think it's just a really great confidence boost for him, a chance to get used to North American ice and the style of play. 38 points for him in 26 regular season games, but in the playoffs for Seattle, who's just an absolutely stacked team, he has 9 points in his first 4 games, which is kind of absurd. And he's doing it the way that we all hoped he would. It's his skating, it's his hands. It's kind of coming together a little bit. So it's exciting to see. Easy guy to root for again. A lot of fun watching Brad Lambert play, just whipping around the ice. So that's my prospect of the week. Someone to keep an eye on in the WHL playoffs if Seattle goes deep here. Peter, could you give us your prospect of the week here?
Kind of talked about him a bit early on in the show, but if you want to hear my talk about Nick Lardis, you could just rewind back to the beginning of the show. Yeah,
exactly. Give me a timestamp.
Timestamp, exactly. Just go back to that. But yeah, I mean, very well deserving of the boost in the rankings because of his overall play. Didn't quite look like he was having that with the Petes. They were struggling, and then all of a sudden gets traded to, playoff team where he's starting to come around. Offensive games picking up, goal scoring ability, shot is on display. And I'm excited once again excited to see what he's going to do at the U18s, because he's definitely someone that I've kept my eye on for quite some time.
Yeah, Lardis has had just a real fun turnaround to watch. Absolutely. Going from like half a point per game to like 1.5 in like it's a tale of two seasons, no doubt.
Short time. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, who's your prospect of the week this week?
Well, returning to the Canucks prospects, Jet Wu is my prospect of the week. He had a heck of a season and very flying under the radar for me, because I was, we didn't really stand out until later in the season, and had 3 games where he had 3 goals in 3 games, and then finished the season with 7 goals and 21 points, a career high in the AHL. His previous career high, 8. So 8 to 21 points and 7 goals was the most he's had since he was with the Calgary Hitmen, when he had 7 in his final season of the WHL. And he was a pretty good point producing defenseman when he was in juniors. He had 66 point season with Moose Jaw in 2018-19. Hasn't really shown a lot until this season, I think, of being a legitimate prospect again, because he was drafted in the 2nd round. A lot of people thought could maybe play with Quinn Hughes in the future, right-hand defense. Everyone's saying, well, the Canucks need right-hand defense. Well, they do have one in their system, and that's Jet Wu, and he's one of the top defensemen on Abbotsford. Once Christian Wolanin got called up to the NHL and played a ton of games, he was their top defenseman at 55 points, something crazy, and stayed there, obviously, until the end of the season. But he's not a rookie. He's not young. He's more of that journeyman AHL guy. But Jet Wu took over and became the top defenseman, and he actually led Abbotsford Canucks into the playoffs, because he actually clinched, not into the playoffs, but clinched home ice for the Abbotsford Canucks, and with an overtime goal. So he's now become back. He's returned to being a legitimate prospect for the Canucks, because he was mentioned in the closing or the press conference with Patrick Alvin and usually he's not mentioned. So that's great, because I want to see Wu succeed. I want to see him in the NHL, because we need that chant. We need it. So I'm really excited to see that he's actually putting it together. But much more physical as well, in 96 penalty minutes, when he usually was doing that in the WHL as well. So, I think he's now, like I say, returned to being a legitimate defensive prospect in the Canucks system, and they don't have a lot of them. So, Jet Wu, prospect of the week.
Yeah, for sure. I got lots of time for Jet Wu. I can see a world where he turns into what Luke Shen is like now.
Yeah.
Like kind of best off in a depth role, but hits anything that moves and just makes safe, smart plays all the time. I think Vancouver would be very happy if that's where he ends up, but I hope he does. That'd be pretty sweet. All right. Well, that does it for us this week. Thank you all for tuning into another episode of Prospect Corner. Make sure you subscribe to the Hockey Writers YouTube channel to make sure you don't miss any of our episodes. Also, make sure you check out our site, thehockeywriters.com, for tons of 2023 NHL draft coverage over the next couple months. Make sure you check out Hockeypedia on thehockeywriters.com. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Matt. And thank you all for watching this week's episode of Prospect Corner. We'll see you next time.